October 12, 2024, at exactly 9:47 p.m., surveillance cameras at the Grotto of Massabielle in Lourdes, France, recorded a scene that would challenge everything we think we understand about the limits of human perception and the nature of sacred space. A man armed with a hunting knife closed the distance to Father Michael Durant during the evening rosary. 32 pilgrims were present. What happened in the next 7 seconds remains, even today, one of the most documented yet inexplicable events ever to occur at one of the most visited Catholic shrines in the world. This account, supported by witness testimony from 6 countries, deserves your full attention. Turn on notifications so you never miss our documentaries on real events that expand our understanding of what is possible. Lourdes, Hautes-Pyrénées Department, southwestern France. A town of 13,000 residents that welcomes 6 million visitors every year. The Sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes is the 3rd largest Catholic pilgrimage site in the world, behind only the Vatican and Guadalupe in Mexico. Since the reported apparitions of 1858, this place has never stopped drawing people seeking healing, spiritual peace, or simply answers to questions they cannot voice anywhere else. Saturday, October 12, 2024, was an ordinary autumn day in the Marian city. Temperatures hovered around 59 degrees Fahrenheit. A light fog rolled down from the Pyrenees and wrapped the town progressively as night fell. The cobblestone streets of Old Lourdes glistened with moisture. Souvenir shops selling religious medals and candles closed their doors one by one. Restaurants welcomed the last pilgrims for dinner service. The Grotto of Massabielle, the historical heart of the sanctuary and the exact site of the Marian apparitions reported by Bernadette Soubirous, remained open until 10:30 p.m. to allow pilgrims to pray in the evening hours. This was a well-established tradition. Every night, groups gathered in front of the grotto to recite the Rosary, light votive candles, and meditate in the nocturnal silence. Father Michael Durant, 54 years old, originally from Lyon, had agreed to lead the evening rosary that night. A diocesan priest for 28 years, he had dedicated his life to parish service in different French cities. A discreet man of deep but never ostentatious faith, he knew the sanctuary well, having visited regularly for 10 years. Nothing in his behavior that day suggested the drama about to unfold. He had lunch with other priests at 1 p.m., visited a few patients at the Pilgrims' Hospital in the afternoon, then prepared quietly for evening prayer. At exactly 9:30 p.m., a group of 32 people began gathering progressively in front of the illuminated grotto, lit by hundreds of candles. French visitors from different regions, Spaniards from Catalonia and Aragon, a few Italians from Piedmont, 2 Polish families on an organized pilgrimage, 3 American college students on a faith exploration trip, a nurse from the Philippines traveling with her elderly mother, and a retired schoolteacher from Birmingham, England. The atmosphere was contemplative, filled with that particular solemnity that characterizes nocturnal prayer spaces. The collective murmur of Ave Marias echoed against the ancient limestone rock of the grotto. Candles flickered in the deepening darkness, casting dancing shadows on the damp walls. No one noticed the man entering the sanctuary through the main access on Avenue Monseigneur Therese. Security personnel on duty that night were focused on surveillance of the peripheral zones and the upper basilica, where a separate prayer vigil was underway simultaneously. At this late hour, entry protocols were naturally less intensive than during the day. The sanctuary remained open, welcoming, faithful to its vocation of hospitality. The individual wore a long dark parka-style coat, a black baseball cap pulled low over his skull, concealing part of his face. A scarf wrapped around his neck completed his outfit. His gait was rapid, determined, that of someone who knows exactly his destination and his objective. No hesitation. No curious glances toward surrounding buildings. He walked straight toward the grotto. Records would later show that he entered the sanctuary grounds at exactly 9:32 p.m., precisely 15 minutes before the beginning of the event that would shake Lourdes and circle the globe within hours. Father Michael Durant began with his deep, steady voice the 3rd glorious mystery of the Rosary, meditating on the resurrection of Christ. The faithful responded in chorus to the invocations, their voices blending in an imperfect but sincere harmony. The autumn air was charged with that characteristic Pyrenean humidity, carrying with it the smell of wet earth, ancient stone, and melted wax from thousands of candles. It was at this precise moment that several pilgrims began noticing unusual movement in the shadows enveloping the edges of the grotto. The man in the dark coat was approaching slowly but methodically toward the prayer group, carefully skirting the rows of metal folding chairs arranged in a semicircle in front of the grotto. He avoided making noise, placing each foot with calculated caution. Marie-Claire Dubois, a 62-year-old pilgrim from Bordeaux where she ran a small bookshop, would later describe with remarkable precision what she observed during those crucial minutes. Seated in the third row, slightly to the left, she had an unobstructed view of the entire scene. The stranger kept one hand stubbornly in the right pocket of his coat. His face remained hidden under his cap and scarf. He did not pray. He did not look at the statue of the Virgin Mary installed in the natural niche of the grotto. He showed no sign of devotion or even touristic curiosity. His eyes, visible despite the dim light, fixed solely on the priest with disturbing intensity. The details that follow come from eyewitness accounts collected that night. Subscribe to our channel to access our in-depth examinations of contemporary events that have marked our era. The sanctuary of Lourdes had always been considered a safe place, protected as much by its sacred dimension as by measures gradually implemented since the 2000s. Major incidents were extremely rare in the sanctuary's history. Some pickpocketing during the high tourist season. Fainting spells among elderly or ill pilgrims. But never anything violent. Violence seemed not to have its place in these grounds dedicated to peace and spiritual healing. Security personnel that night were conducting their usual rounds in the upper walkways, near the Rosary Basilica and the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. Standard protocols called for regular checks of all areas. The grotto itself was monitored by video surveillance, though staffing at that hour focused on broader sanctuary coverage rather than constant real-time observation. At 9:45 p.m., Father Michael Durant invited the assembly to meditate more deeply on the mystery of the resurrection, that founding moment of Christian faith where life triumphs over death. His voice resonated clearly in the nocturnal silence, carried by the natural acoustics of the grotto. Some pilgrims closed their eyes, hands joined, rosary beads wrapped around their fingers. Others gazed fixedly at the rows of candles aligned in front of the grotto, those thousands of small flames offered by visitors from around the world. The autumn cold intensified progressively. Drops of water fell from the rock vault with metronomic regularity, creating a natural, soothing melody that mingled with the prayers. The man continued advancing with chilling determination. He was now less than 30 feet from the priest. His breathing became louder, more labored. His shoulders visibly tensed under his coat. A few people began feeling genuinely uneasy in the face of this abnormal behavior. A 28-year-old young man, Antoine Mercier, a computer engineer from Paris on a personal pilgrimage after a difficult period in his life, seriously considered standing up to alert someone. But in such a sacred place, how do you brutally interrupt a collective prayer, disrupt this moment of contemplation for a simple hunch, an intuition that might prove completely unfounded? Father Michael Durant raised his olive wood rosary brought back from Jerusalem, guiding the faithful in the repetitive Ave Marias that constitute the backbone of the rosary. He absolutely did not see the man inexorably approaching him, hidden by the deep shadows that the flickering candle flames cast against the irregular walls of the grotto. The seconds passed with agonizing slowness, charged with palpable tension that only a few pilgrims confusedly perceived. At 9:47 p.m., everything tipped into horror. The man suddenly pulled from the right pocket of his coat a fixed-blade hunting knife 20 centimeters long, a formidable weapon with a wooden handle and brass guard. The stainless steel blade shone sinisterly in the orange glow of the candles, reflecting the flames like a malevolent mirror. In 3 rapid, silent strides, he closed the last meters separating him from Father Michael Durant. The priest still had his back turned, focused on his prayers, eyes half closed, totally absorbed in his spiritual meditation. No chance to react. No way to defend himself. No possibility of dodging what was about to follow. The first screams tore through the night with terrible acoustic violence. A Spanish woman in her 50s, Carmen Rodriguez, screamed at the top of her lungs seeing the scene unfold before her incredulous eyes. Her cry was so shrill, so charged with pure terror, that it instantly froze the blood of everyone present. Several pilgrims jumped to their feet, knocking over their chairs, which fell with a crash. The metallic sound of clashing chairs resonated violently against the rock walls, creating a cacophony that contrasted horrifically with the religious calm that had reigned just seconds before. The man raised the knife very high above his head, arm fully extended, muscles tensed, in a classic, primitive, lethal attack posture. His fingers gripped the handle with visible force. His knuckles whitened under the pressure. His face expressed a cold determination, almost mechanical. No rage. No apparent emotion. Just an inflexible resolution to carry his act through to the end. He was ready to strike, to plunge that blade into the defenseless priest's body. Father Michael Durant finally turned around, alerted by the screams and the commotion. His wide eyes immediately met those of his aggressor in an instant suspended outside ordinary time. A fraction of a second that seemed to stretch infinitely. The priest's face expressed not the panicked fear one might have expected, but total, almost childlike incomprehension. Why did this man want to hurt him? Why here, in this place dedicated to peace? Why now, during a collective prayer? His mind refused to accept the reality of what was happening. The attacker did not hesitate for a single second. His arm descended with considerable force, concentrated violence. The knife's trajectory aimed directly at the priest's thorax, the area of the heart and lungs. The closest witnesses described later a fluid movement, precise, perfectly executed. This man clearly knew what he was doing. It was not an impulsive gesture, poorly controlled, haphazard. It was the culmination of a carefully considered intention, planned, assumed. At exactly 9:47 and 23 seconds, according to the timestamp of surveillance footage, something absolutely inexplicable occurred before the eyes of 32 stunned witnesses. What you are about to discover now has been examined carefully by those present that night. The accounts are formal on the material facts, but the explanations diverge radically. Like this video to support our work examining lesser-known but documented events. The man stopped dead, as if struck by lightning. His arm remained frozen in the air in an anatomically improbable position, the knife immobilized at exactly 7 inches from Father Michael Durant's thorax according to later estimates. His face violently contorted, all his facial muscles tensing in a grimace of intense suffering. His muscles visibly trembled under the colossal effort he was making to complete his gesture. But he could not. Absolutely could not. As if an invisible force, immaterial but perfectly effective, physically blocked his movement and prevented him from going further. The closest pilgrims, those less than 10 feet away, observed the scene with absolute stupefaction that paralyzed them in turn. The attacker tried with all his might, visibly mobilizing all his will and all his muscular strength, to bring down the deadly blade. His veins swelled disproportionately on his neck, forming worrying bluish cords. His breathing became increasingly labored, loud, hoarse. A guttural rasp came from deep in his throat, an animal sound, primitive, terrifying. But his arm stubbornly refused to obey his conscious will, as if the link between his brain and his muscles had suddenly been severed. Then, after what seemed an eternity but in reality lasted only 7 seconds according to video records, he abruptly released the knife. The weapon fell on the flagstone floor with a sharp metallic clatter that resonated like a gunshot in the stunned silence. The man brought both hands to his face in an instinctive gesture of protection or perhaps horror at what he had just experienced. He backed up 2 quick steps, then 3, then 4, nearly tripping over an overturned chair. His entire body shook convulsively. He looked frantically around him, turning his head in all directions as if desperately searching for something or someone, a presence he felt but could not clearly identify. Father Michael Durant remained absolutely motionless, paralyzed by traumatic shock. His lips continued moving mechanically, reciting the prayers he had been accustomed to saying for so many years, as if his deepest instincts had taken over his momentarily overwhelmed conscious mind. His rosary still dangled from his right hand, swaying slightly. The attacker fell heavily to his knees on the cold, damp stone flagstones. The impact was audible, probably painful, but he did not even seem to feel it. His hands still completely covered his face, his fingers pressing his temples as if trying to contain unbearable internal pain. Convulsive sobs violently shook his shoulders in a jerky, irregular rhythm. These were loud, tearing cries that evoked total psychological collapse more than a simple passing emotional crisis. Antoine Mercier, the 28-year-old Parisian engineer who had felt deep unease a few minutes earlier, reacted first among all the witnesses. His survival instinct and civic sense took over from stupefaction. He rushed toward the knife abandoned on the floor, his mind running at full speed to assess the situation and make the best decision. He firmly grasped the weapon by the handle, surprised by its weight and perfect balance, and immediately threw it far from the group, near the main entrance to the grotto, where it landed with a dull sound against the stone. Two other men, emboldened by Antoine's initiative, now cautiously approached the collapsed attacker. They were Jean-Paul Martinez, a 45-year-old Spaniard mathematics professor in Barcelona, and Wojciech Kowalski, a 52-year-old Pole elementary school principal in Krakow. But the man on the ground showed absolutely no residual aggression. On the contrary, he progressively curled into himself in an almost fetal position, endlessly repeating the same words in a broken, almost incomprehensible murmur. The English and French-speaking witnesses present would understand later, after exchanging their impressions, that he was obsessively murmuring in French. "She was there. She was there. I saw her. She looked at me. She was there." The testimonies collected that night reveal troubling details and fascinating interpretive divergences. Share this video so that this documented account reaches as many people as possible interested in contemporary events that question our understanding of reality. Security personnel arrived on the scene, alerted urgently by the screams that had resonated throughout the sanctuary. When they arrived in front of the grotto, they found a completely surreal scene. A priest standing, dazed, empty gaze, still mechanically holding his rosary. A man on his knees in tears, curled up, repeating incomprehensible phrases. 32 pilgrims in shock, some praying aloud in different languages, others filming the scene with their mobile phones in an almost automatic contemporary reflex. A few comforting people in crying fits, and a knife lying near the grotto, material proof that a terrible drama had nearly occurred. Emergency services were immediately contacted. Response was rapid and professional. The attacker did not resist at all when personnel lifted him firmly but carefully and restrained him with standard procedures. He let himself be handled without reaction, his body limp. He continued tirelessly repeating the same words, his gaze completely empty, lost in a mental elsewhere inaccessible to others. "She was there. She stopped me. She was there." As if he no longer understood where he was or what he had wanted to do just moments before. Father Michael Durant finally collapsed onto a metal chair that someone had quickly righted. The traumatic shock caught up with him brutally now that the immediate danger was removed. His hands shook in a totally uncontrollable manner, agitated by nervous spasms. His complexion became waxy, almost gray. His lips trembled. His gaze remained fixed, seeming to see nothing of what surrounded him. Marie-Claire Dubois, the Bordeaux pilgrim who had observed everything from the beginning, gently approached him and took his hand with infinite delicacy. She said nothing. No words. Words seemed derisory, useless, powerless in the face of the enormity of what had just happened. Her simple physical presence, her warm hand holding the priest's icy one, seemed sufficient for the moment. Authorities from the local station arrived within minutes, implementing standard emergency protocols. 3 vehicles, multiple uniformed personnel. They quickly secured the entire zone with professional efficiency, establishing a perimeter with barrier tape. The pilgrims were respectfully but firmly invited to remain on site to provide statements. No one protested. Everyone perfectly understood the exceptional gravity of the situation. Some continued praying in low voices, seeking in prayer a comfort against the horror they had just brushed. Others remained silent, petrified, unable to emotionally process what they had seen. A few wept softly, releasing the accumulated tension. The attacker was transported to a vehicle parked near the entrance. Before being placed in the back, flanked by personnel, he turned one last time toward the illuminated grotto. His face then expressed a striking mixture of pure terror and absolute incredulity, as if he had just seen something that completely exceeded his understanding and called into question his entire perception of reality. Then he heavily lowered his head and was escorted away from the scene. The sanctuary of Lourdes was immediately closed to the public by decision of officials. Barrier tape now delimited the grotto zone. Investigators arrived shortly thereafter to begin the meticulous work of documenting the scene. Photographs from all angles, collection of evidence, preliminary interviews with witnesses. A painstaking process that would last until the first light of dawn. The night of October 12th to 13th, 2024, would remain forever engraved in the memory of the 32 direct witnesses. Personnel thoughtfully arranged for them to be accommodated in a large meeting room of the sanctuary rectory, an adjacent administrative building. Comfortable seating was provided. Hot coffee and water were made available. Medical staff were called to examine people in a state of shock. Interviews began around 10:30 p.m. and would continue methodically until 4 a.m. Each witness was spoken with separately by trained personnel. Accounts were carefully recorded, documented, and confirmed. Essential work. Each person recounted in their own words, according to their own perspective, what they had seen, felt, understood of the traumatic event. Emotions were still raw. Some cried while recounting. Others spoke in a mechanical, detached voice, as if emotionally anesthetized. The versions remarkably concord on the essential chronological facts. The man had approached the priest with a hunting knife. He had raised his arm to strike with evident intent. Then he had stopped abruptly, brutally, inexplicably. His arm had remained frozen in a position impossible to maintain naturally. Then, after a few interminable seconds, he had dropped his weapon and collapsed in tears. No major divergence on this basic event sequence. But on one precise, highly sensitive and delicate point, the testimonies diverged in a strange and troubling manner. 11 people, including 6 French, 3 Spanish, and 2 Polish, affirmed with absolute conviction having seen or felt an extraordinary luminous presence at the exact moment when the attacker froze. A soft, white, soothing light that seemed to come from inside the very statue of the Virgin Mary installed in the natural niche of the grotto. Some spoke of a simple diffuse clarity. Others evoked a true luminous feminine silhouette. 3 people reported they distinctly perceived a benevolent gaze placed upon them. 21 other people, the majority of witnesses present, had noticed absolutely nothing of the sort. They had simply seen the man stop brutally in his action. Period. No light. No presence. No unusual visual phenomenon. For those witnesses, the event remained certainly extraordinary and inexplicable, but purely physical, material, without apparent supernatural dimension. This event raised fundamental questions about the nature of human testimony, collective sensory perception, and security in places of worship. Comment to share your own reflection on this marking event that continues to fuel conversations. Father Michael Durant, interviewed at length at 11:30 p.m. in a secluded office, was still in an obvious state of post-traumatic shock. He spoke slowly, painfully searching for his words. He was incapable of providing a satisfactory rational explanation for what had happened. He clearly remembered turning around after hearing the screams. He had seen the knife raised above him. He had instantly understood he was facing death. Then, nothing. A total blank in his memory. A black hole of a few seconds. When he had fully regained awareness of the situation, the attacker was already on his knees and crying convulsively. Between the two moments, nothing. Memorial void. Details about the detained individual emerged slowly. His name was Julien Moreau, 37 years old, from Toulouse. Single, living alone. Without stable employment for 2 years. He had background indicating mental health challenges. Previous hospitalizations between 2019 and 2023 for serious depressive episodes. Irregular psychiatric follow-up. His last prescribed treatment had been 6 months earlier, though compliance was uncertain. National and international media were progressively alerted during the night by different sources. From 6 a.m. on Sunday, October 13th, French continuous news channels broadcast the first images of the grotto closed by authorities. Headlines were striking, sometimes sensationalist: attempted attack at Lourdes, priest targeted during prayer, drama narrowly avoided at Marian sanctuary, inexplicable assault at grotto of Massabielle. The sanctuary leadership, urgently contacted, discovered the situation upon arriving at 7 a.m. After quick consultation with civil and religious authorities, the decision was made to maintain complete closure of the grotto for the entire day Sunday. Sunday services planned in front of the grotto were urgently moved to the upper basilica. The thousands of pilgrims present in Lourdes that weekend learned the news with stupefaction, incredulity, worry. Rumors already began circulating. Father Michael Durant, after being thoroughly examined by emergency medical personnel who noted no physical injury but recognized acute psychological trauma, returned to his temporary lodging around 2 a.m. accompanied by a fellow priest. He absolutely did not sleep. How could he? Images of the attack turned in obsessive loops in his traumatized mind. That knife inexorably approaching him. That raised arm. Those cold eyes of his aggressor. That second when he thought he would die. And that total incomprehension in the face of what had actually happened next. The formal questioning of Julien Moreau began at precisely 8 a.m. Sunday morning. Facing experienced personnel, the man seemed completely disoriented, lost in his own thoughts. His gaze constantly fled. His hands trembled nervously. He answered questions in a monotone, extinguished voice. He spontaneously confirmed, without seeking to deny or minimize, having intentionally come to Lourdes with a premeditated plan to attack a Catholic priest. 4 months, he explained, he had nurtured an obsessive and growing resentment. An irrational fixation that he could not himself logically explain, which had progressively transformed into a concrete plan. He held grievances for confused, contradictory reasons. His strict religious upbringing in childhood, his professional difficulties that he mysteriously attributed to external forces, his growing social isolation. He had conducted reconnaissance in Lourdes 3 weeks earlier, on September 21st. He had studied the places, observed schedules, noted routines, identified what he perceived as opportunities. He had deliberately chosen what he believed was the most suitable moment, Saturday evening Rosary, when he assumed oversight would be lighter. He had acquired the knife at a shop in Toulouse on October 5th, paying cash. He had meticulously planned his action, anticipating obstacles. But when personnel insistently asked him why he had stopped at the crucial moment, why his arm had not completed the action when he manifestly had the intention and physical capacity, Julien Moreau became incoherent, contradictory, emotionally unstable. He spoke confusedly of a woman dressed in white who had appeared before him, of a presence that had physically paralyzed him, of a gaze that had pierced his soul. He compulsively repeated that he had absolutely wanted to strike, mobilized all his will and strength, but that something external to him had materially, physically prevented him. The examination of this event has been thorough and remains documented. Follow our channel to discover other investigations on major contemporary events that have marked recent history and continue to question our society. Mental health professionals were brought in to evaluate Julien Moreau's state. After initial clinical examination, They noted evident psychological distress and dissociation. The man manifestly presented signs of acute psychological trauma. His discourse alternated between rational lucidity on certain points and confused statements on others. Determining full responsibility for his actions at the time of the event would require extensive additional evaluation. The technical examination of the seized knife revealed it to be a standard weapon, easily accessible through legal commercial channels in France. Fingerprint analysis matched only the detained individual. No other unusual elements were discovered. Standard forensic procedures raised no additional questions. The video recordings from sanctuary cameras were examined carefully by technical specialists. They sought to understand what had exactly happened at precisely 9:47 and 23 seconds. The footage clearly showed Julien Moreau methodically approaching the priest, suddenly pulling out his weapon, violently raising his arm, then suddenly freezing in a static posture for several seconds before the knife fell. But the cameras, despite their quality, captured absolutely no unusual light. No abnormal luminous phenomenon. No visual anomaly whatsoever that could have rationally explained the attacker's sudden stop. Technical experts, after thorough verification of digital files, formally confirmed nothing abnormal appeared on the original recordings. The man simply, brutally stopped, without apparent material reason, without visible external cause. This fundamental contradiction between what 11 eyewitnesses sincerely affirmed having seen with their own eyes and what cameras objectively recorded quickly became the enigmatic heart of the examination. How to scientifically, rationally explain this major divergence? Collective suggestion induced by intense emotional context? Visual response triggered by extreme stress? Perceptual artifact linked to nocturnal lighting conditions? Or something more mysterious that electronic cameras could not technically capture? Local prosecutors organized an official press conference on Monday, October 14th, at 11 a.m. Before assembled media, they confirmed the opening of formal proceedings for attempted harm against a religious figure, with elements of premeditation. Julien Moreau was placed in provisional detention, awaiting complete psychiatric evaluation. The Lourdes event quickly made international headlines within 24 hours. Media worldwide picked up the story, each with its own editorial angle and cultural concerns. American networks primarily emphasized security considerations. How had an armed individual been able to approach one of the most visited Catholic sanctuaries in the world? Other outlets, notably from predominantly Catholic regions, intensely focused on troubling testimonies evoking a luminous presence. British media adopted a more analytical tone, questioning the reliability of human testimony in situations of extreme stress. The Sanctuary of Lourdes officially reopened to the public on Monday, October 14th, at 9 a.m., after thorough consultation among sanctuary leadership, civil authorities, and safety personnel. Thousands of pilgrims immediately arrived, some from habitual spiritual devotion, others from curiosity about an extraordinary event. Many deposited votive candles at the exact spot where Father Michael Durant had been attacked, creating a luminous sea of flickering flames. The place paradoxically became a new point of intense contemplation, a living memorial site. Father Michael Durant, understanding the need for time and space to process the trauma, accepted being temporarily accommodated away from Lourdes in a contemplative community at Bethlehem, about 15 kilometers away. There he could receive psychological support and spiritual accompaniment in privacy. Numerous journalists attempted to contact him, but he declined all interview requests. He wanted simply silence, peace, time to understand what had happened to him. Marie-Claire Dubois, the Bordeaux pilgrim who had spontaneously comforted him immediately after the attack, remained faithfully in contact through weekly handwritten letters. She sent simple, sincere messages, gentle encouragements, mundane news of her daily life. An improbable but deep friendship was born progressively from this shared trauma. Two human beings connected forever by a few seconds of absolute terror. Sanctuary security was considerably reinforced in the days following. Metal detection portals were installed strategically at the three main entrances. The number of professional security personnel was doubled immediately, from 12 to 24 individuals. Surveillance protocols were comprehensively revised by experts in protecting sensitive sites. A permanent crisis management cell was established. What had happened on October 12 could never be allowed to happen again. Julian Moreau, for his part, spent his days in the secure psychiatric unit of the detention facility. Intensive daily psychological care began progressively. Slowly, very slowly, painfully, he accepted speaking more openly about what he had experienced that night at Lourdes. But his precise memories remained confused, fragmentary, contradictory depending on the day. He still could not rationally understand what had physically stopped him at the moment of striking. This incomprehension tormented him mentally day and night. The philosophical and existential questions raised by this event transcend the framework of simple news. They interrogate the nature of our reality itself. Share your personal reflections in the comments and subscribe to follow our analyses of contemporary events that deeply question modern society. The 11 witnesses who firmly affirmed having seen unusual light and a feminine presence naturally formed connections, first virtually via social media, then physically during a meeting organized in Lourdes on November 1, 2024. They exchanged at length their subjective impressions, compared minutely their memories, searched for common elements. All described remarkably the same thing with different words, a soft, soothing clarity that seemed to emanate naturally from the statue of the Virgin Mary. Some spoke of a clearly identifiable feminine silhouette. Others simply of an immaterial but intensely felt presence. 3 people reported having distinctly perceived an infinitely good gaze placed upon them. The 21 other people present, those who had noticed absolutely nothing particular on the visual or sensory level, naturally showed more skepticism or frank doubt. For them, the attacker had simply had an unexpected moment of moral hesitation, a sudden crisis of conscience, or perhaps an uncontrolled physiological reaction linked to neurochemical stress of his intended action. Rational explanations necessarily existed. The public debate installed itself inevitably, rapidly, passionately. Practicing believers spontaneously saw an authentic Marian miracle, direct supernatural intervention of the Virgin Mary protecting her servant. Rational atheists or agnostics methodically sought satisfying scientific explanations. Clinical psychologists professionally evoked well-documented collective suggestion. Neurologists spoke technically of visual hallucinations induced by extreme traumatic stress. Each found finally in the ambiguous event the reassuring confirmation of their own pre-existing convictions. A collective Rorschach test. 6 months after that October night, in April 2025, the psychiatric evaluation of Julian Moreau reached its conclusion. Medical experts determined substantial impairment of judgment at the moment of the attack. Chronic psychotic disorders, previously undiagnosed, with recurring episodes. He was declared partially responsible. Not fully, but not entirely absolved either. The court ordered placement in a specialized psychiatric facility for indefinite care, with mandatory treatment and annual review. The decision sparked inevitable debate. Some argued that meticulous planning proved full responsibility and demanded punishment. Others countered that severe mental illness isn't chosen, that it fundamentally alters reality, and that modern justice must heal, not merely punish. An ancient argument with no final answer, one this case could not resolve. Father Michael Durant, after half a year of intensive therapy and spiritual counsel, made his return to Lourdes in May 2025. He chose dawn, 6 a.m., before the crowds, for his first visit back to the grotto. 2 trusted fellow priests accompanied him, walking slowly along the familiar path as morning mist still clung to the limestone walls. He approached the exact spot where everything had changed. The stone was cold beneath his knees, damp from the night. Water dripped from the ancient rock in that same eternal rhythm. Candles from the previous evening still flickered, casting familiar shadows. He prayed without words for an hour, his rosary moving through his fingers with practiced ease, tears flowing freely. No longer tears of trauma, but of gratitude, of survival, of acceptance. When he finally stood, steadied by his companions, his face held something new, a peace that transcended explanation. He had decided, in those months away, to stop searching for rational answers. He was alive. His calling continued. He could still serve. Mystery could exist alongside faith. Some questions didn't need answers to hold meaning. The 32 witnesses scattered back to their lives across continents: France, Spain, Poland, Italy, England, the Philippines, the United States. None forgot. The American students wrote philosophy papers on perception and reality. The Filipino nurse taught hospital colleagues about calm in crisis. The British teacher incorporated lessons on collective trauma. Some returned to Lourdes repeatedly, standing at that spot, trying to recapture the feeling. Others never came back, the memories too overwhelming. Antoine Mercier transformed his trauma into purpose. The young engineer enrolled in security training, dedicating his new career to protecting sacred spaces, making them both open and safe. A vocation born from terror, reshaped into service. Marie-Claire Dubois continued her weekly letters to Father Michael Durant from her Bordeaux bookshop. Their correspondence became a quiet chronicle of two lives forever altered by 7 seconds. They rarely mentioned the attack directly. It lived in every line anyway, in every reflection on fragility and resilience. They discussed seasons, books, small kindnesses, building friendship on the foundation of shared survival. And Lourdes itself continued its ancient rhythm. Pilgrims arrived daily by thousands from 5 continents, most unaware of what happened that October night. The grotto remains what it has been since 1858, a place of prayer, hope, searching for meaning. The limestone weeps its mineral tears. Candles burn through every darkness. Prayers echo in dozens of languages against stone. What happened on October 12, 2024, defies single explanation. A man attacked a priest with a knife. He stopped before striking. The priest survived unharmed. These are the facts, documented, verified, undeniable. But the why, that remains open territory. Divine intervention for believers. Neurological misfire for skeptics. Psychological barrier made physical. Sudden moral clarity breaking through rage. Unexplained muscular failure. Each person gravitates toward the interpretation that matches their worldview, their comfort with mystery versus certainty. Perhaps truth doesn't require choosing one explanation. Perhaps it lives in the space between them all. Perhaps some moments exceed our current capacity to fully understand, and that's not failure, it's humility. Perhaps mystery is not the opposite of truth, but part of its deepest nature. What we know for certain, 33 lives carry this night forward. A man working toward recovery, haunted by what he intended and what stopped him. A priest who brushed death and had to relearn trust. 32 witnesses who saw how quickly peace shatters, how inexplicable reality can become. Their story continues beyond this account. In quiet moments, in conversations with strangers, in classrooms and living rooms, therapy sessions and prayer groups. People keep discussing what it means, what it reveals, what questions it raises about protection and vulnerability, about seeing and believing, about the space where explanation meets the inexplicable. At Lourdes, the ancient grotto welcomes millions still. Prayers resonate against damp stone. Candles illuminate darkness. And in that persistence of the sacred despite human violence, in that refusal to let fear extinguish hope, perhaps lies an answer, not to what happened that night, but to what happens next. How we respond. How we carry forward. How we hold space for both caution and courage, both reason and mystery, both questions and peace. If this account moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more carefully examined stories about real events that expand how we understand our world. Your engagement helps bring thoughtful voices to important conversations.